At least 85,000 babies have been born alive after failed abortions since 1973. Welcome to Freedom Alive. Abortion survivors are not hypothetical. They're real people who have a story that needs to be heard. In fact, at least 1,734 babies survive abortions in the United States every year. And Melissa Ohden is one of those survivors. Melissa joins us today to share her story and how she is giving other survivors a platform through her organization, the Abortion Survivors Network. Melissa and her team have connected more than 640 survivors as of 2022. I'm thankful to again be joined by our co-host Matt Staver from Liberty Counsel. And Matt, when we think of someone who has survived a failed abortion, we never know if it's a person we know or interact with often. And it's so tragic, horrific actually, that pro-life legislators are forced to fight to pass laws to protect these precious people, each of whom is designed in the image of God.
You know, you think this would be a no-brainer. Everyone would want to protect someone who is born alive and they're struggling for life. But the Born Alive Infant Survivors Protection Act is one that passed the U.S. House. There were 2 Democrats that voted with all of the Republicans. The rest of them voted against it. It's now over in the United States Senate. And there's opposition from some to pass that. Why? Because they say, well, this might infringe on somebody's abortion. Well, no, this person is already born alive. They're now born. They're outside of the womb. They are alive. They're visible right there. Why would you not want to protect that individual? And Melissa's story is one of those stories of many, many that actually are individuals who were born alive and survived, and they're now, carrying on various lives. We need to protect our children. Obviously, we need to do that in the womb, but certainly those that are born alive need to be protected as well. The kind of care that you would give to any brand new infant should be the same care that you would give to a baby who otherwise was intended for abortion, who was born alive.
A remarkable battle that we almost make a choice on, the battle between life and death. We are delighted to bring this story to you. Our Freedom Alert is next.
Harrisburg must be held accountable for infringing pro-life speech. I'm Matt Staver, co-host of Freedom Alive. Liberty Counsel has asked the appeals court for a permanent injunction to prevent Harrisburg, Pennsylvania from enforcing its ordinance that has prohibited pro-life volunteers from counseling near an abortion facility. Liberty Counsel represents 2 women who have regularly engaged in peaceful sidewalk counseling to encourage women to protect their unborn children. These women have been harassed and intimidated by clinic staff and local police since the ordinance passed. The ordinance silences pro-life counselors on more than 70 feet of public sidewalk, even though the city denies it. Yet Planned Parenthood employees are permitted to go within that area to escort women into the abortion center. The city must be held accountable for its unconstitutional enforcement that infringes on pro-life speech.
Up next, Matt's interview with Melissa Ohden.
I'm pleased to welcome our very special guest, Melissa Ohden. She is the founder of the Abortion Survivors Network and the author of You Carried Me, a Daughter's Memoir. Welcome to Freedom Alive, Melissa.
Thanks so much for having me.
Melissa, you are a survivor of abortion, and I want you to share your story about how all of this began. What happened at the very beginning of your life that you're one of these, and I think your statistics list 85,000 babies at least, and I think that's probably just the tip of the iceberg, are individuals who have been born alive after a failed abortion since 1973, and you're one of those individuals, living, breathing individual. Tell us about your story.
Absolutely. We live in a world that somehow wants to say that abortions don't fail and people like me don't exist. But as you quoted in that research, we've looked at data from Canada and we've ran the numbers to realize that there are likely around 1,800 survivors every year in the United States alone. And so when you start to do the math, you come up with 85,000 during the time of Roe alone. And you're right, I am one of those babies who survived during that time period. My birth mother, as a 19-year-old college student back in 1977, was unfortunately forced to undergo a saline infusion abortion. It was the most common procedure performed back then, a very horrific procedure for the baby and for the mother. And that procedure involved injecting a toxic salt solution into the amniotic fluid surrounding the baby in the womb. And the intent of that toxic salt solution was to poison and scald the child to death. Usually lasted about 3 days. The child's life would be ended by that solution, and then they would induce labor with the intent of that dead baby being expelled from the womb. But we know through my medical records that I actually soaked in that toxic salt solution for 5 days.
Wow.
I'm stubborn, I often say. I wasn't going to budge. And so, of course, they believed that the abortion would end my life. And when they finally induced my birth mother's labor that 5th day, I was accidentally born alive.
Wow. And yeah, that is a horrible death for a child, to be surrounded by a very high concentration of saline. It's like swimming in the Dead Sea, if you will, and then ingesting all of that as you're breathing it in and out of your lungs. So you have all of that in your lungs as well. Very painful way. But you survived that, and you're one of many survivors, whether it's a saline abortion or some other kind of abortion. Many individuals survive. You're the only one that I believe, or you're the first one that I believe, has ever gone to the White House as an abortion survivor during the time of President Donald Trump.
Yeah, that was incredibly meaningful. I got involved in the pro-life movement back in 2007, gave up a kind of anonymous, safe life career as a social worker to fulfill what I believe God was calling me to. And so I've been so blessed to support other ministries over the years, get to know other survivors like me, find out what we need and create an organization to serve them. But in the midst of that, really have been involved in policy work. And I'm incredibly grateful for the Trump administration and all that they did to get us to this place.
Now, so you survived an abortion. What happened after you were born? Obviously, they intended that you would be dead, but you came out and you're still alive. What happened? How did you survive that moment? What occurred?
Yeah, every survivor's circumstances are unique, and that's part of the conversation that I want our culture to have about born-alive infants. Yes, children like me are surviving late-term abortions still today. In various states, there are induction of labor where the abortionist, intends for the child to not survive a preterm delivery or intends to leave them to die afterwards. And sometimes babies are surviving first trimester, second trimester abortions, and people aren't even knowing it when that baby is ultimately delivered, say, full term. But we know through my experience and far too many that children like me are not immediately provided medical care. Again, our culture wants to pretend like born alive legislation isn't needed, that somehow this doesn't happen, or, people see our humanity and suddenly embrace our life. But there's a reason why the abortion industry named survivors like me the dreaded complication, because they dread a live birth. So I was not immediately provided medical care. My own grandmother was a nurse who forced that abortion, came face to face with me and demanded that the other nurses leave me there to die.
So wait a minute. Your grandmother was a nurse in the hospital where you were to be aborted and was putting pressure on her daughter, your mom, to abort you. And then when she realized that the abortion did not end your life, she pressured the other nurses to do other things to neglect you to end your life.
It's hard for people to hear. And, I'm always the first person to say, it's easy to judge my grandmother and condemn her. And that's not why I share those details. I want people to understand that this is what happens regardless of people's relationship. And no matter what I've ever learned about my grandmother, I still forgive her because I can only imagine what happened in her life to lead her to make those kind of decisions about my own. And I'm forever grateful that no matter what demands she made, there were the right people working that day who stood up to her, and I was ultimately rushed off to the NICU.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Obviously, there were people who didn't listen to your grandmother's directive to leave you alone. What did they do? And your story of what happened afterward is sort of indicative as to why we need a Born Alive Protection Act to protect people like yourself who are born alive after intended failed abortions.
Absolutely. I think if people knew what, first of all, if people really had to come face to face with abortion, I do believe it would change hearts and minds. If they understood what happens behind closed doors to children like me, I think it would truly change our culture. And really, I think that's why abortion survivors are so important in the pro-life movement, because we humanize this issue in a way that nobody else can. And, you know, I am one of the lucky ones. If I would have survived an abortion at, say, Planned Parenthood, I would not be here with you today.
Right. Right. And so there are so many like this. We have legislation that has passed through the U.S. House. There were 2 Democrats that I believe voted in favor of it, along with all the Republicans. The rest of them voted against it. It's now pending in the U.S. Senate. And it would require that individuals that are born alive after these intended abortions, that they would get the same kind of medical treatment that anyone else that would be born alive at that age of life. Yet there's opposition to that. It's just unfathomable that people would oppose a bill that would say, help people like Melissa. Yeah, they may have been intended for abortion, but now they're born and they are alive. Help them. Don't just throw them in the trash can, put them in the toiletry or whatever it may be. This is a very critical bill that should pass our United States Congress.
Yeah, this should be a consensus builder. This should not be a partisan issue. And I'll be really honest, I feel disrespected when this becomes a partisan issue. I was there that day when we voted on that, and I was so grateful to be with members of Congress, but to see Democrats dressed in white to protest this bill, protesting people like me, it's almost like gaslighting on a regular basis to people like me and women who have failed abortions.
It should not be a partisan issue. I mean, this is an issue of life. It should transcend all political parties. It should transcend cultures. It is the essence of life. And you are a miracle of life. In fact, right now we're going to bring up your birth certificate. So this is your birth certificate. We also have a picture of you. And we know that your young daughter of 14 years of age was born in the same hospital in which you were intended to be aborted.
That's right. I mean, there's nothing that God won't do. And that gives me great hope. And I hope it does to other people as well. I am now united with my own birth mother, even after the long journey to get to know the details of our lives.
Yes, and we actually have a picture of your birth mother. So the mother that was there going through the saline solution abortion, you are reunited with her. So the amazing thing is you got your birth certificate. You're reunited with your mother. It's a picture that we have with you and your birth mother. And then obviously you have given birth in the same hospital. That was going to be your deathbed. Now you gave birth to your own daughter there, and she's now 14 years of age. An incredible story of healing and how the miracle of life is just unfathomable. And your story of being able to get this out is so incredibly important. You started the Abortion Survivors Network, obviously as a result of your experience and you coming public out about what happened to you. You've encountered many other people just like you. Tell us some of the stories and some of the things that your ministry does.
Absolutely. We are the only organization worldwide who serves people with healing support, community, so peer relationships. We offer skill development in things like public speaking and advocacy leadership. We'll be launching ambassadors across the United States later this year, so people can go on our website, abortionsurvivors.org, and find out more about the statistics behind failed abortions. You can come face to face with more survivors like me, and folks will be able to see, do you have a survivor who is trained in your state that you could contact for interviews or marches or events? And so, you know, everybody's story is beautiful and powerful. And I think one of the stories that is so close to my heart here recently is we've had a mom who reached out and gave birth just in the last couple of months after taking both chemical abortion pills. And baby is, you know, alive and well. But that mom is struggling with her own guilt over trying to abort them. And I think that's what I want people to understand is abortion isn't just something that affected my life. It affected my birth mom's life. It affected our entire family. And so if we know that there are tens of thousands of abortion survivors, how many hundreds of thousands of family members have been impacted by that? So that's where we need to head, I believe, in the pro-life movement, is reaching and serving women right now who are contemplating abortion, who are having failed chemical abortions and are considering having another abortion, and serving those who have been hurting for a long time.
I know there's a personal story that I have with Baby Rowan is his name, but he was aborted in Orlando, Florida, and the woman who aborted him was counseled to do so, even though she had already had children before, counseled to abort and come to Florida where she could get a late-term abortion. And she was given the medication to induce abortion, but nothing to kill the child while the child was still in the womb. So she actually gave birth to this baby live while she was sitting on the commode in the abortion clinic that day, still attached to the umbilical cord, screaming for help. Obviously, when she saw her little baby, she realized it was a horrible mistake, and nobody was there to lift a finger to help her. They would not help. In fact, they turned away the EMS services that a friend had actually called by calling 911, and Baby Rowan died. I saw Baby Rowan in the morgue in Orlando, Florida, in a little shoebox that was in the morgue as they pulled him out of that slab, that place where you put dead bodies. Unbelievable. So she's someone who, like many, she realized now she made a mistake. It was too late for her. Who needs healing? Lots of women like that, lots of families like that. But also, little Baby Rowan, I bet he's not one of your 85,000 statistics because they didn't report it. These abortion clinics have this happen all the time, and they're not reporting the fact that this baby was born alive. In fact, in some cases, as we know with some abortion doctors, they're intentionally killing them after they're born alive so that they wouldn't have to have a live birth. So what you're doing in the ministry, you're doing to help women and families and protect these little children is so incredibly important.
Thank you. And you are so right. The numbers are underreported. We know that there have to be so many babies who are even surviving chemical abortions that we don't even know the count of chemical abortions even taking place. And so, we are entering an important time where I hope that people continue to understand how important it is that we're involved in the fight for life. It is not done.
Well, I know you've been working on some of this federal legislation, the Born Alive Survivors Protection Act, that's passed in the House. We still need to get it passed in the Senate, and obviously it needs to be signed to go into law that would ultimately protect these babies, or at least have federal consequences for those that intentionally violate that law. But there's also state laws that you're working on as well, or that people can work on as well, because if we can't get it passed in the U.S. Congress right now, we can certainly get it passed in different states, and some states have certain protection, but a lot of states don't.
Correct. We only have around 10 states right now that have any kind of born alive protection. And I want people to understand as well, even if there's something on the books, it doesn't mean that those children are still being provided medical care. Right. Minnesota and Texas are prime examples of that. When you read through those state reports, you can read a count of 3 children who survived abortions and none of them were provided medical care. 6 in Texas, no medical care. And for Minnesota, we know that that current law is actually under attack. So they are looking to overturn that existing law in Minnesota so they wouldn't have to have born alive reporting or care for survivors anymore.
I know one of the things that you've got in some of the notes that I'm looking at here is that overall born alive records are either completely missing or else they're full of inconsistencies and gaps. And certainly in the abortion clinic situation, when you have a baby that was intended for abortion and it's born alive, they likely won't even tell the mother that the child is born alive. They're just going to take it in another room and dump it someplace. Or, as we've seen with some abortionists, they intentionally snip the spinal cord of the child's back of the neck. Unbelievable brutality that's taking place. So a lot of this goes unreported.
Correct. And, for a world that wants to talk about supporting women and hearing women, what's empowering to a woman to engage in that kind of behavior and put her in that traumatic position where something is happening to her child? One of my friends, Sarah Zagorski, is also an abortion survivor. She's from Louisiana. We were together for the Born Alive bill recently, federally, and her mom, in a state of distress, had to fight for medical care to be provided to her. The abortionist had said, right, I'm not going to provide this child any medical care. You don't want them, right? They're going to be a vegetable. And the woman, under a state of duress, said, I will sue you if you don't provide her medical care. Who would ever think that's okay?
Yeah, I think, when you said earlier, if people just realized what happened in abortion, they would change their mind, or at least most people would. That's what happened to me when I saw for the very first time any issue regarding abortion, 1983, Assignment Life. And that documentary, as a pastor, I didn't know about abortion. I just read what I read in the media. I didn't know anything about it. But that Assignment Life actually had a first trimester suction tube abortion. And they reassembled the baby body parts to make sure they got all the parts so you wouldn't have any body parts left for infection. And when I saw that, I realized this is a real human being. This is not just rhetoric about choice and reproductive freedom and all that. This is a real human being. People, I encourage you to look into the reality. It's gruesome as it is, of what's happening in our own community. And don't remain silent. We can't remain silent when these children continue to get aborted, ripped apart, or even born alive and then left for dead.
Thank you for that.
Well, Melissa, you have a book, and it's called You Carried Me, A Daughter's Memoir. I know that that's about your incredible story. How can people get a copy of that book?
Absolutely. You can go to my website, Melissa Ohden, OHDEN.com. There's a direct link there. You can, of course, go on Amazon, and it's on our website as well, abortionsurvivors.org, with the next book, as you shared, coming out in January of 2024.
Yes, and that next book, what's the topic of that?
It's entitled Abortion Survivors Break Their Silence. And so I tell about 10 or 11 other abortion survivor stories, and also through the voices of women like my birth mom who have had abortions that they stopped, or abortions that reversed, or that failed, because we also haven't heard the voices, by and large, of women who have had those abortions that have failed. So I'm excited about it.
That's a whole voice that we just don't hear. And I think that's so important and empowering, frankly, to be able to have those voices for those who are silently smoldering in their guilt, if you will, so that they can realize other people are in that same situation and that there's healing and there's forgiveness in Jesus Christ.
Amen. Yeah, so many women think they're alone, and they are far from it.
Now, you actually have indicated that your team has connected more than 640 survivors of abortion as of 2022. What do you mean by that? How do you connect them, and what do you do for these individuals?
Abortion survivors tend to find us. So, most survivors think that they're the only one, can spend decades believing they're the only one. And every survivor finds out in a different way and at a different time. So we have infants right now who we work with their parents to support them with the questions that they have. We have survivors who are in their 90s. So people who survived long before Roe versus Wade. This has been happening. And that's not an excuse to say that it should continue to happen. I hear that, right? The other side will say, well, it's always happened. That doesn't make it okay. And so they reach out to us, and some people just simply want to know they're not alone. That's where the connections come in. So they may touch base and say, gosh, I'm one of you. Here's my story. Or they'll touch base and say, I need healing support. So we have a specialized curriculum that we offer. They may connect with us and say, you know what, I really want to get engaged in the pro-life movement.
And your website, again, is the abortionsurvivors.org, abortionsurvivors.org. And Melissa, your book there is You Carried Me, A Daughter's Memoir, and a new book soon to be released in 2024. Thank you, Melissa, for all you're doing. Thank you for being a voice for life.
Thank you.
Matt, another Genesis 50:20 story, right?
Yeah.
What
God intended for good, what they intended for evil.
Yeah.
And Melissa was intended for death, and now she's a voice for life.
Yeah. I mean, if the enemy has his way, her birth mom doesn't want her, wants an abortion. The remarkable aspect of the story with her grandmother, who is serving as a nurse in that process, right? I mean, if there's any child that you can think of that had such a rough start that Satan intended, game over, but God, the God of life.
Just like Joseph and his brothers.
Yeah.
His brothers should be protecting him, and they're trying to kill him.
Exactly.
But God ultimately used that to be the salvation for Israel.
Yeah.
And here she was intended for death by her grandmother, but now she is a voice for life.
Yeah.
And she gets reunited with her birth mom, and she has birth to another child.
In the same hospital.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unbelievable. And then further, the way that God works is she now starts the Abortion Survivors Network many years ago, and is just the arc of her life.
Well, and I think a big issue here, too, is that she is a physical manifestation of abortion. All of what you just listened to and observed should not have happened because they wanted her dead. She would never have grown up. She would never have a child. That child is now in the teens, and that child, will have other children likely in the future. That whole generation would come to an end. Melissa's very existence is a threat to the dark abortion agenda. And no matter what circumstances you face, life is always the choice. Death never saves a bad, broken system. Life always overcomes tragedy. The tragedy that you may experience or the pressure that you may feel, that is temporary, it'll go away. But life transcends that. Death ultimately is the greater complication and burden that happens when you're trying to eliminate a life in order to address other issues, other stressors in your existence.
For those of you at home, God loves you. He loves your family. He loves all of his kids. And I pray that listening to Melissa's story like this gives you the inspiration to get involved, as she said, to learn about the reality of what really happens in this versus what the media wants to tell us. And thankfully, there are organizations like hers that you can become involved in, literally become involved in, to save lives. And I don't know what could be more amazing than to be part of something like that, where you could participate in that 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 times. And I pray that you will. I pray that you will. It's absolutely our honor to bring stories like Melissa's to you. And we're just delighted to do it. In closing, remember Psalm 127, verse 3, which says, "Children are a heritage from the Lord, offspring a reward from him." Our freedom is a gift from our Creator. We must never forget that and always protect it. So join us here next time, where you'll hear victories as well as ways you can stand up for your priceless freedom. Join us again for Freedom Alive.